Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. You're gonna like this. So I decided just to spend the day talking about beef and cowboys. That's right, beef and cowboys. So because so much of the American culture revolves around like these ideas that aren't necessarily true, I want to kind of talk about one today. Cowboys. So people are like, oh, ain't nothing more American than cowboys. Well, we're going to talk about that today. The main thing about cowboys is that cowboys only existed in like our, imagination about how they existed for like 10 or 15 years. And they weren't anywhere nearly as original to America as people think they are. They're actually completely not original in America, and it wasn't like an American idea or concept. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're also going to talk about how different innovations came out and with cattle and beef in general. All right, beef and cowboys. So let's start with talking about cowboys. All right. So the guy here on the left, that's a cowboy. The guy here on the right, that's not a cowboy. That's called a vaquero. You know what vaquero means? Cowboy. So, cowboys, they are in Texas, and we're going to talk about why cowboys exist in Texas. They literally herd cows. That's what cowboys do, and they take them and they march these big dumb animals a really long distance. Well, Mexico owned Texas for a long time, so Mexico had cowboys that would march these big dumb animals down to Mexico from Texas, and they were called vaqueros. Then when Texas became part of the United States, the American version of that is a cowboy. It's literally the same thing, but Mexico had done it long before America does it. And basically the Cowboys 100% just take everything the vaqueros done. That's not a dig on cowboys or anything like that. But to herd cattle, there's a certain way of doing it. The vaqueros had done it, and then when the Americans did it, it's like cowboys, and they're like, look how American this is. The vaqueros have been doing it for about 100 years, and the cowboys are going to do it for about 10 or 15 until their jobs basically disappear. And we'll talk about that with some new technology that comes out that basically makes cowboys, in the true sense of the term, obsolete. But you can see, they're almost exactly the same. You got the chaps on for riding horses all the time. It almost looks like these two guys could be related in the actual two pictures that I pulled up. But yeah, so being a cowboy is nothing unique in America. The Mexicans have been doing it for a long time before. All right. So let's talk about what they do. All right. And why do they have a job? Well, why do they have a job? Because these things here are delicious. All right. So this here's a cow. All right. There ain't really no such thing as vegetarians back then. There's no vegans, vegetarian. People ate meat. And cows is good eating. Still is today. Ground beef, steak, all types of stuff come from cows. All right. So this cow here. All right. And pardon me if I have any cattle farmers in my class that are watching this, and I really, really butcher this. I'm going to refer to these cows, the cows you see all outside, like in rural areas. These are the eastern cows that you see today. These were in Europe. All right, these cows here, good eatings. All right. Now, the problem is cows. If you've ever been around a cow before, cows are dumb. All right, and typically farmers aren't super rich. Cattle need a lot of area to graze because they eat a whole bunch of grass. It's amazing this animal gets this big eating grass, but whatever. So they need a whole bunch of area, all right, in order to eat grass. Well, to keep them in your area, you have to build a big fence. Now, cattle are stupid, all right? These animals right here see a fence, they're like, and they'll just like run through the fence like, or just like knock the fence down and go off scampering. All right. So now if you had like a stone wall or something, sure, but no farmer can afford that. You can have a brick wall surrounding like a, 150 acre, 160 acre farm. It's just not feasible. So the problem with cattle is there's no way to like keep them in. Now I'm sure people did have cattle, but it was like a delicacy because they were so expensive, because nobody had them, because you couldn't raise them, because you couldn't keep them in the fence. All right. And they would just wander away. So this is where Texas becomes important. There's some cattle in Texas. All right. And they're called the Texas Longhorns. That's a type of cattle. You know why they're called the Texas Longhorns? Because they got really long horns. That's why. All right. So this is a picture of Texas Longhorns. So this is a cattle that's down in Texas. All right. This cattle only eats the grass that grows in Texas. Believe it or not, very picky eater on the grass that they eat. So they don't travel real far. They just kind of stay in the same area. So what would happen is a rich guy will go down to Texas and he'll buy a bunch of land. Any cattle that live on that land is now his cattle. All right. These cattle here are good eatings. All right. And you don't have to have them in a fence because they just kind of stay in the same place all the time. All right. So this is going to be called free range cattle. All right. Yeah. If you look at Mr. Wexler, there's clearly a fence here in the background. Yeah, I know, because this is a modern picture. But back then it was free range. All right. So if you have two guys that own land nearby, do you know how they kept their cattle separated so they don't like mix in with each other and you know which cattle is yours? Because we're going to talk about these cattle make a bunch of money for these landowners. This is where the branding comes in, where you'll like burn your mark in them so you know which cattle is yours. If you try to steal somebody else's cattle, bad things happen. This is, Texas problems. All right. So this is where most of the best steak and beef come from in the United States. There's also this time period in the late 1800s where there's starting to be this belief that pork is really bad for you. Like it can cause diseases and stuff. It's not that pork is super healthy for you, but people kind of started going to the other extreme. Like, oh, I want to eat less pork. There's probably some religious significance to that as well at the time. But there is a demand for cattle. All right. Now, I also want to clarify as we talk about these cattle. So we're going to talk more about here these Texas Longhorns. Let's talk about another type of cattle. This cattle. We ain't talking about this cattle. This cattle here, if you see these, man, these are safe cattle. All right. These cattle are going to live a long, healthy life. These are dairy cattle. All right. This is where you get your milk from. You don't go out and you don't eat these. Now, at the end of their life, when they're not putting out milk and they've lived a long, healthy life, yeah, they're probably not dying of old age anywhere. But these cattle, I always think it's funny on like the Chick-fil-A commercials. They always have like these cattle out here being like, eat more chicken. And I'm always like, man, those cattle ain't in any fear of, getting eaten. Now, granted, I'm arguing with a fictional cow that is illiterate. Maybe that just shows more my shortcomings. But so we ever see these cows, these black and white spotted? These are dairy cows. They milk them all the time. It's probably not the most enjoyable life to get milked all the time, but these cattle aren't the ones that are getting eaten. All right, the ones that want to eat, the Texas Longhorns at the time. So let me show you a map here. Here's how and what the life is like for a cowboy, and it's brutal. So this area here, like on the map, says this is the cattle procurement area. This is where the cattle live, all right? So anybody that owns the land here owns all the cattle there. Well, here's the thing. People all over the country want to eat it. There are railroad tracks and stuff here in Texas, so you could slaughter it in Texas, all right, and get all your meat and then ship it around the country. Here's the problem, though. It's going to spoil before it gets there, all right? It takes a really long time to get places, and the meat will just go bad before it can get there. So what they want to do is they want to get the cattle before they slaughter it up here into Kansas, Abilene and Ellsworth. All right, this is famously called the Chisholm Trail. All right, as you get up here, and these are big railroad cities. You can slaughter them here and then ship them out and get to all the major cities here real quick. All right, now, so the problem becomes, how do you get these big dumb animals, these guys, all right, from here to here? Cowboys. That's how. You're going to have these cattle walk. Now, you need somebody that herds them across the country up here. This is where the cowboy comes in. The rich dude that owns the land, he ain't crazy. He ain't going to do this. To be a cowboy, you basically have to be like kind of insane. Here's also another massive myth on cowboys. Massive myth is that they're white. The majority of the cowboys are black. They're freedmen, all right? Because this is a very dangerous job. Nobody cares what the color of your skin is. If you can get those cattle there safely and healthy, they don't care if you're black, white, or whatever. It's one of the, this and the whaling industry are like two of the early on equal opportunity jobs in America. It doesn't matter if you're black or white. Can you get the job done? So a lot of the early cowboys are black. The majority are black. But since the movies that predict cowboys were really famous in the early 20th century, in the mid-1900s, when America was still racist, they always cast like John Wayne or a white guy as the cowboy. When in actuality, there were more black cowboys than there were white cowboys. So what would happen is this guy that owns the cattle, he's like, all right, they're good and fat, time to take them up here and get my money. So he hires a cowboy. The cowboy's job is to march those big dumb animals all the way across Texas, across Indian territory, a lot of dangerous stuff, keep stampedes from happening, and get them all the way up here, all right? And the percentage of animals that show up in as good a shape as possible is how the cowboy gets paid. So the money isn't bad, but most of your life is going to be spent walking with these big dumb animals up here and then coming back. And then like the next year, I would assume you do it about once a year, is making a huge push north of these big dumb cows. So these are where the cows naturally live. For a long time, they were going from here down to Mexico City. All right, until Texas becomes part of the United States, and now they're going to go up here and go to America. This is why the vaquero had been doing this for a long time, and they just bring them further south. So the cowboy, once again, kind of it is very much a stolen idea from Mexico. All right, so here's where so as the cowboys start marching these big dumb cows north, all right. They're dumb. The animals will only eat the grass that is grown in Texas, right here. So it takes them a long time to march them all the way up here. It probably takes them months. Those big dumb animals refuse to eat. They refuse to eat as they get all the way, walk away up here. So by the time they show up here, they're all gristly and muscular and like, it's still beef, but it's not nearly as good as it would taste had the animals been slaughtered down here. But hey, there's no other options, so you're making a ton of money off of selling all these Longhorn cattle up here, all right? And then the money goes back to the owners, and then the owners will pay the cowboys, all right? That lasts about 15 years. Then a collection of things come out that is going to make this whole job of having to march them all the way up here obsolete. And there's three things that are going to happen pretty much at the same time that is going to make this what's referred to as the open range system, which is where the cattle just hang out and do their own thing and then get marched up here without any fences or anything. That's called the open range system. So at the very end of the 1800s, there's three things that are going to happen simultaneously that stop the open range system. All right. So of those three reasons, two of those reasons come from a brand new invention called barbed wire. All right. So here's what happens, and man, I feel really bad for it doesn't bother him at the time, but oh man, looking back on it, so literally this right here is a revolution. I mean, it changes everything because fences are really expensive. You couldn't have fences to keep animals in because they'd be like, just knock them down. So there's this guy, and he was like trying to figure out an easy way to make cheap fencing. Well, he figured out if he just gets wire and then puts these little barbs in the middle and like twist it up so it's sharp, so like animals don't want to touch it. So the wire is really cheap and just makes sharp edges. Calls it barbed wire. Cool. So a guy invents it, all right? Invents barbed wire. And he puts it up at his property. And it's really cool. His neighbor comes over and says, that's really awesome. The guy's like, yeah, I can show you how to do it. And the guy's like, awesome. And the guy's asking him, he's like, you mind if I sell this? And the guy's like, I don't care. Like, whatever. So the neighbor takes this guy's idea and makes a gazillion dollars off of it and like patents it. The neighbor who made it isn't really upset by it, which he's just like, whatever, cool, I'm glad you're rich. Fantastic. So I guess that to me, I'm always like, oh, it's so crazy that guy could have been rich, but he apparently doesn't care. So barbed wire in the late 1800s comes out, and it is a game changer. So there's 3 reasons that this open range system of the Cowboys is going to go away. 2 of those reasons come directly from barbed wire, and I'll show you. All right. So the first reason is you now have this barbed wire can keep in that eastern cow. All right, the cow be like, try to go like run through the barbed wire like, and cows take about 2 seconds to realize, yeah, I ain't trying to run through that thing. Barbed wire can now keep the eastern cow in. Eastern cow is good eating too. Now, all around the country, you can now have these cattle wherever you want to keep them at. You don't have to rely on the Texas Longhorn cattle. You can have them in North Carolina. And barbed wire fundamentally makes beef more available than anything else because the cattle have plenty of room to go eat, and you can have a fence stretch all the way around your property line. Very inexpensive compared to other fences. All right. So the first reason that it ends the open range system is barbed wire can keep the cows in. So you don't need the Texas Longhorns. All right. Here's the second reason barbed wire is going to end the open range system. So what I have here is an actual map. So I showed you with the Homestead Act yesterday. All right. I showed you with the Homestead Act how they gave it out in perfect 160 acre squares. Well, I wanted to get a zoom in with a clearer one. You can see some of these people have 160. Some of them have split it up. I don't know if they sold half their land to somebody else. But regardless, when they divided it up, they put it in perfect squares. Well, what are they all growing? Food. They're all in the Homestead Act. They all get 160 acres of land. They're all growing food. You know who likes to eat food? Animals. So once barbed wire comes out, every one of these people is going to surround their property with barbed wire to keep animals from coming in and eating their crops. All right. What happens, though, is the entire center of the country, because you see, there's no gaps between their property lines. All right. The entire center of the country gets covered in barbed wire. So now, even if you wanted to march those big, dumb animals from Texas further north, there's not a path forward to be able to do that. So barbed wire makes it impossible to march those big dumb animals north. So not only do people not necessarily need the Texas Longhorns anymore because they can just like have cows outside, all right, but it also makes it impossible to actually march them if you wanted to, right? So those are the 2 ways that barbed wire is going to end the open range system. And here's the third way, all right? Refrigerated railroad cars. Let me bring that down a little bit there. Now, Texas Longhorns is still good eating, all right? And yeah, you can grow you can get a cow outside, but oh, those Texas Longhorns are really good. We should get a fresh one like down in Texas, get a fresh steak before it goes bad. Well, then they come out with a refrigerated railroad car, all right? So what they can do is they can slaughter those Texas Longhorns now in Texas, put them on a refrigerated railroad car where it's really cold and keeps the meat from going bad. Then they can ship it anywhere they want to in America without having to use the the Cowboys at all. So the refrigerated railroad car is kind of the last nail that eliminates the need for Cowboys and makes Cowboys pretty much obsolete. So the refrigerated railroad cars. This is all right. Let me go ahead and tell you this story. So, this is how the meat, it makes sense because in a meat packing plant, when you cut up the meat, you always want to have it hanging up like this. All right. The reason you want the meat hanging is because the cold air equally wraps around it. All right. Because if you stack it, then you get cold areas and like it just doesn't. So you always want it hanging. Plus it keeps like animals and stuff off of it. So that's just how factories have always done it. In really cold factories that want to keep this meat fresh. So when they make refrigerated railroad cars and they realize that they can do the same thing in a railroad car and ship it around the country, they naturally think, hey, we're just going to hang it up like this. So this is going to lead to some issues. When you build railroad tracks and you get to a mountain, all right, what do you do? Well, you have two options, all right? The first option is just blow a hole in the mountain and go directly through it. This is a very expensive way of building railroad tracks. Usually when you get to a mountain, you just try to go around it like this, all right? Well, when they first started using refrigerated railroad cars, and they would send the railroads off with packed with all this meat up to, we'll say, Chicago or wherever it's headed to, it wouldn't show up. And they're like, oh, gee whiz. Must have broke down somewhere. Well, we're sending out another train tomorrow. We're going to send that train out as well. And when it sees the first train, they'll stop. They'll help fix the first train. And both trains will show up. And they're like, okay, because they're communicating back and forth in telegraph lines saying that the train never showed up. So they send the second train out. Well, that one doesn't show up either. So they're like, that's weird. They must both be broken down somewhere. Let's just send an engine out with like some mechanics to fix it because it must be a really complicated problem. So they send just an engine out to go help them out. The engine will get all the way to Chicago or wherever it's supposed to go and never see the trains. And they're like, where'd they go? They just disappear? No. The problem with it, when you put meat on the train like this and you have it all hanging, just dangling, and you go around a sharp turn like that, all that meat starts pulling out to lean to the side, and the entire train whips off down the side of the mountain, and everybody dies, and the train bursts into flames. This happened multiple times before they realized, we probably should keep the meat from swaying out to the outside when it goes around a turn. Otherwise, it pulls the train off the tracks, and everybody dies. So it didn't take them long to fix that, but that was an issue there at the beginning. All right, that's as far as we're going to get today. I hope you enjoyed that. I will see you guys soon.